Richard Sullivan's knuckles gleamed white as he gripped the steering wheel of the patrol car, the siren silent, but the lights pulsing red and blue, casting an eerie glow across the rain, slicked streets of Upper East Side Manhattan. His partner, Marcus Hayes, peered through the windshield at the sleek black Lincoln Navigator that had caught their attention 3 blocks back. "Too nice for this neighborhood this late," Sullivan muttered, his jaw tight as he accelerated, closing the gap between their cruiser and the SUV. "Let's see who's driving." Hayes nodded, already reaching for the radio. "Probably some banker working late." The Navigator signaled, pulling smoothly to the curb as their lights flashed behind it. Sullivan parked, leaving the strobing lights on, standard procedure that turned every traffic stop into a public spectacle. Both officers stepped out, Sullivan's hand resting casually on his holster, a habit formed over 15 years on the force. Inside the Lincoln, Dr. Malcolm Pierce, Associate Justice of the New York State Supreme Court, Appellate Division, exhaled slowly, his 52-year-old hands remaining visible on the steering wheel. Through his rearview mirror, he watched the officers approach, their figures distorted by rain drops sliding down the glass. 25 years on the bench, and still, his heart raced during traffic stops. A visceral response burned into his psyche since adolescence. Sullivan approached the driver's side, while Hayes positioned himself by the passenger window, flashlight beam cutting through the luxury interior. The leather seats, the polished wood trim, the custom suit on the driver, all registered in Sullivan's mind as incongruent with his expectations. "License and registration," Sullivan demanded, his tone flat, authoritative, without the courtesy of explanation. Malcolm kept his movements deliberate, his voice measured. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I've been stopped?" His fingers remained visible, nowhere near his pockets. Sullivan's face hardened. "License and registration first, questions later." "Of course." Malcolm reached slowly for the glove compartment. "I'm just getting my registration from the glove box." Hayes' flashlight followed his every move, the beam steady and intrusive. Malcolm retrieved the documents, then carefully reached for his wallet in his inner jacket pocket, extracting his driver's license. He handed both to Sullivan, who studied them with narrowed eyes. Malcolm Pierce. Address on East 78th Street. The registration matched. "Everything in order." "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" Sullivan asked, handing the documents back with reluctance. "No, officer, I don't. I was traveling under the speed limit and obeying all traffic laws." Sullivan's lip curled slightly. "You failed to come to a complete stop at the intersection 2 blocks back. Where are you coming from at this hour?" It was nearly midnight. Malcolm had been working late, reviewing cases for tomorrow's docket. A fact that shouldn't matter, but somehow always did. "I'm coming from my chambers. I was working late." "Your chambers?" Sullivan's tone shifted to disbelief. "And what do you do?" Malcolm hesitated, always uncomfortable with this moment. The revelation that inevitably changed the interaction's trajectory, either toward deferential respect or deeper suspicion. "I'm an Associate Justice of the New York State Supreme Court, Appellate Division." Hayes snorted from the passenger side, the sound carrying through the night air. Sullivan's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened. "Step out of the car, sir." Malcolm's heart sank. "May I ask why that's necessary?" "I've provided my identification and registration." "Step out of the vehicle now," Sullivan repeated, his hand moving to his holster, fingers drumming against the leather. "When an officer gives you an order, you comply." Malcolm recognized the escalation tactic, had seen it hundreds of times in courtroom testimony. With deliberate calm, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out into the drizzle. His tailored suit, a dark navy brioni, immediately began collecting moisture. 6'1", with broad shoulders and the dignified bearing that 25 years on the bench had cultivated, Malcolm stood eye to eye with Sullivan. "Put your hands on the car and spread your legs," Sullivan ordered. "Officer, this seems excessive for an alleged traffic violation that..." Sullivan moved with practiced speed, grabbing Malcolm's arm and spinning him around, shoving him roughly against the navigator's side. The judge's cheek pressed against the cold, wet metal of the car roof. "When I give an order, you follow it," Sullivan hissed, kicking Malcolm's legs apart. I don't care who you think you are." The "think" hung in the air between them, laden with implication. Malcolm remained silent as Sullivan's hands roamed over his body, patting him down with unnecessary force. Hayes watched from a few feet away, his expression unreadable in the dim street light. "Got anything in your pockets I should know about? Weapons? Drugs?" Sullivan's voice carried an expectation, almost a hope. "No. As I stated, I'm a judge. I don't." Sullivan's hand cracked against the back of Malcolm's head, snapping it forward against the car with enough force to split his lip. Blood, warm and metallic, filled his mouth as pain bloomed across his face. "I didn't ask for a speech," Sullivan growled. Simple yes or no answers. Malcolm's instinct for self-preservation battled with his innate dignity. He swallowed blood. "No, officer." Sullivan continued the search, rougher now, pulling items from Malcolm's pockets, wallet, phone, keys, and tossing them onto the car roof. When he found nothing incriminating, his frustration manifested in another shove, pressing Malcolm harder against the car. "You're sure this is your vehicle? Seems pretty expensive for..." Sullivan left the sentence unfinished, but its completion hung in the air. Malcolm had faced this insinuation countless times. The implication that his possessions, his achievements, his very presence in certain spaces required explanation. That as a black man, prosperity was suspect. "It's registered in my name, as you verified." Malcolm replied, keeping his voice level despite the blood, now dripping from his split lip onto his shirt collar. From the corner of his eye, Malcolm noticed a subtle movement in his coat pocket. His hand had left his phone recording when Sullivan had pulled it out. The device now lay on the car roof, camera facing the interaction, a small mercy in a situation rapidly deteriorating. Hayes had circled the vehicle, flashlight beam sweeping across the interior. "Car's clean," he called out, disappointment evident in his tone. Sullivan stepped back, allowing Malcolm to turn around. The judge straightened his suit jacket with as much dignity as he could muster, blood still trickling from his lip. "Am I free to go, officer?" Malcolm asked, fighting to keep his voice steady as he gathered his belongings from the car roof, careful not to draw attention to the recording phone. Sullivan's face contorted, frustrated by the lack of pretense to escalate further. "You should watch how you drive in this neighborhood, Your Honor." The title came out like an insult. "Wouldn't want anything to happen to you or this fancy car." The threat was thinly veiled, but Malcolm merely nodded, unwilling to provoke further violence. He returned to the driver's seat, closed the door, and waited as the officers retreated to their patrol car. Only when they pulled away, disappearing around a corner, did he allow his composed facade to crack. His hand trembled as he touched his split lip, examining the blood on his fingers under the dim interior light. He picked up his phone, stopping the recording and saving it immediately. Then he just sat, allowing the rage and humiliation to wash through him like a physical wave. After several deep breaths, he started the engine and drove the remaining 6 blocks to his brownstone, moving on autopilot, mind already cataloging every detail of the encounter. At home in the sanctuary of his study, Malcolm replayed the video. The footage was mostly audio, capturing Sullivan's voice, the sound of the blow, Malcolm's head hitting the car. It wasn't perfect evidence, but it was something. More than most victims of police harassment ever had. In the bathroom mirror, he examined his injuries. The split lip had begun to swell, and a bruise was forming across his cheekbone where his face had hit the car. For 25 years, he'd worn the judicial robe, commanded respect in his courtroom, and rendered judgments that shaped lives and law. Yet tonight, on a rainy Manhattan street, none of that had mattered. He was simply another black man, deemed suspicious by virtue of existence. Malcolm stared at his reflection, at the blood, the swelling, the lingering fear and anger in his eyes, and made a decision. This would not pass unnoticed. Not this time. Not for him, and not for the countless others who lacked his platform, his resources, his voice within the system. Justice Sullivan and Hayes had no idea what they'd just set in motion. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Malcolm's bedroom, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. His alarm hadn't gone off yet. It didn't need to. Sleep had been elusive, his mind replaying the previous night's events in an endless loop. The throbbing in his lip and cheek served as constant reminders of his encounter with officers Sullivan and Hayes. Malcolm pushed himself up, wincing at the stiffness in his shoulders and neck. In the bathroom mirror, the damage was even more evident in daylight. His lower lip swollen to twice its normal size, a dark purple bruise spreading across his left cheekbone, with a small cut where the skin had split against the car's metal roof. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Olivia, his daughter. He hesitated before answering, unsure if he wanted her to see him like this. Dad. Her voice came through, warm and familiar. At 28, Olivia had followed him into law, though she'd chosen the public defender's office over his path to the judiciary. Are you still coming to dinner tonight? Mom's making your favorite. Malcolm cleared his throat. Despite their divorce 5 years ago, he and Eleanor maintained a cordial relationship, largely for Olivia's sake. Monthly family dinners were their tradition. I might need to reschedule, sweetheart, he said, trying to sound normal despite his swollen lip. There was a pause. What's wrong? You sound different. Always perceptive, his daughter. Malcolm sighed. I had an incident last night, with police. What? Alarm sharpened her voice. Are you okay? What happened? I'll tell you everything tonight. I'm fine. The lie came easily, practiced. How many times had he assured his daughter of his safety in a world that consistently demonstrated otherwise? Dade. Tonight, Olivia. I promise. He softened his tone. I need to handle some things first. After reluctantly saying goodbye, Malcolm dressed with care, selecting a charcoal suit that projected authority, a crisp white shirt, and a deep blue tie. His judicial robe would cover the ensemble in court, but the ritual of dressing helped center him, restored a sense of control. His first call was to Anthony Carter, the Manhattan district attorney, a former colleague from his days as a prosecutor. The phone rang several times before Carter's voice, gruff with morning irritation, answered. Malcolm, it's not even 7. This better be important. I need to see you before court. My chambers, 8 o'clock. Malcolm kept his voice even, professional. There was a pause. Everything all right? 8 o'clock, Anthony. Malcolm ended the call. His next call was to his clerk, informing her he'd be arriving early and needed privacy until his meeting with the DA. Then he called his bailiff, requesting additional security for the courtroom today, a precaution that felt suddenly, viscerally necessary. By 7:30, Malcolm was in his chambers, reviewing the video once more. He'd uploaded it to his secure cloud storage and made multiple copies. Experience had taught him the fragility of evidence in cases involving law enforcement. At precisely 8, a knock on his door announced Carter's arrival. The district attorney entered, coffee in hand, his usual confident stride faltering as he caught sight of Malcolm's face. Jesus Christ. Carter breathed, closing the door behind him. What the hell happened to you? Malcolm gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Anthony. I need to show you something. He played the video. Carter's expression darkened as he watched, the coffee forgotten in his hand. When it ended, silence filled the wood-paneled room. I want them charged, Malcolm said finally. Assault, official misconduct, civil rights violations. Everything you can throw at them. Carter set his coffee down, leaning forward. Malcolm, you know it's not that simple. It is that simple. I was assaulted by police officers during a baseless stop. I have evidence. I want charges filed. The NYPD union will fight this tooth and nail. They'll claim you resisted, that the force was justified. They'll drag your name through the mud. Carter's eyes flickered to Malcolm's injuries. And the video doesn't exactly show the blow itself. Malcolm's jaw tightened. So you're telling me that even as a sitting Supreme Court justice, with video evidence, I can't get justice when police assault me without cause? Carter had the decency to look uncomfortable. I'm saying it will be complicated. Politically sensitive. Politically sensitive. Malcolm repeated, the words bitter on his tongue. And if I were white, would it still be politically sensitive, Anthony? The district attorney didn't answer, which was answer enough. Malcolm leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his ribs, where Sullivan had shoved him against the car. File the charges, Anthony. Or I take this video to the press, and I explicitly state that the Manhattan DA's office refused to pursue justice for a sitting judge who was assaulted by NYPD officers. Carter's expression hardened. That sounds like a threat. Malcolm, it's a promise. You know me, Anthony. I don't make idle threats. Their eyes locked in silent battle. Finally, Carter nodded. I'll open an investigation, but this stays quiet until we've gathered more evidence. Interviewed witnesses, pulled traffic cameras, the works. If we go public now, evidence has a way of disappearing. Malcolm nodded, satisfied with this concession. I want daily updates. You'll get them. Carter stood, retrieving his coffee. And Malcolm, be careful. Officers like these, they don't take kindly to being challenged, especially by someone like you. Someone like me. Malcolm echoed flatly. Carter grimaced. You know what I mean. A black judge with influence. You're everything they fear. Power they can't control or intimidate. After Carter left, Malcolm sat in silence, contemplating the day ahead. He had a full docket. Mortgage fraud cases that suddenly seemed trivial compared to the weight of last night's events and their implications. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Olivia says something happened. Are you really okay? Malcolm stared at the message, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. How to explain that no, he wasn't okay? Not because of his physical injuries, but because of the stark reminder that all his achievements, his position, the respect he commanded in his courtroom, were a thin veneer easily stripped away by two officers who saw only his skin. I'll explain tonight, he texted back. Some police trouble. I'm handling it. He set the phone down and donned his judicial robe, the heavy black fabric settling over his shoulders like armor. His chamber's door opened to the courtroom, where attorneys, defendants, and observers would rise as he entered. For now, at least, he was still Judge Pierce, respected and deferred to. But as Malcolm touched his swollen lip one last time before entering his courtroom, he knew that something fundamental had shifted. The thin line he'd walked his entire career, between the system he served and the injustices that system perpetuated, had finally, irreversibly fractured beneath his feet. 3 days after the incident, Malcolm sat in his chambers reviewing Carter's first report on the investigation. The preliminary findings were promising. Traffic camera footage confirmed Malcolm's Lincoln had made a full stop at the intersection in question, invalidating Sullivan and Hayes' stated reason for the stop. The cameras had also captured parts of the interaction, though from a distance that made details difficult to discern. Most significantly, this wasn't Sullivan's first complaint. His personnel file revealed 6 prior allegations of excessive force, all involving minorities, all dismissed without discipline. Hayes had a cleaner record, but had been Sullivan's partner for only 8 months. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. Olivia entered, concern etched across features that resembled his own. The same deep-set eyes, the same strong jawline. She'd come directly from court, still dressed in a tailored navy suit, her braids pulled back in a neat bun. Dad. She crossed the room, setting her briefcase down. You look terrible. Malcolm smiled despite himself, the expression pulling at his healing lip. Thank you, sweetheart. Your bedside manner is impeccable. Don't joke. She perched on the edge of his desk. Mom told me what happened. Why didn't you tell me right away? I wanted to handle it properly first. Make sure the investigation was launched. Olivia's expression turned skeptical. And, is Carter actually doing anything, or just going through the motions? The investigation seems genuine. They've pulled traffic footage, witness statements from residents in the area. Sullivan has a history of similar complaints. Of course he does. Bitterness colored her voice. And I'm sure he's received appropriate consequences for none of them. Malcolm couldn't argue with her assessment. He'd seen the pattern play out countless times. Complaints filed, internal investigations conducted, no disciplinary action taken. The blue wall protecting its own. This time is different, he said, with more confidence than he felt. I'm not some kid from Harlem. They can intimidate into dropping the complaint. I'm a Supreme Court justice with photographic evidence and the political connections to ensure this doesn't disappear. Olivia's expression softened. I know, Dad. But these officers, the system they represent, they don't like being challenged, especially by people who look like us. Be careful. The echo of Carter's warning sent a chill down Malcolm's spine. I'm being cautious. The courthouse has increased security, and I've been taking car services home. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his precautions. Have you thought about going public, using your platform to highlight what happened? Malcolm leaned back in his chair, considering. The question had haunted him since the incident. As a judge, he'd always maintained a careful distance from political activism, viewing his role as an impartial interpreter of law. But this was personal in a way that blurred those carefully constructed boundaries. Carter wants to keep it quiet during the investigation, he said finally. And I understand his reasoning. Evidence has a way of disappearing once police know they're being investigated. But afterward, Malcolm met his daughter's gaze, saw the fire there, the same passion for justice that had driven her to become a public defender, fighting daily battles for clients the system was designed to crush. Afterward, yes, this can't just be about me getting justice for one incident. It has to be about changing the system that allows these incidents to happen at all. Olivia smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. That's my dad. They were interrupted by Malcolm's clerk, Jessica, who entered after a quick knock. Judge Pierce, there's a Detective Monroe here to see you about your case. Malcolm exchanged a glance with Olivia. Send him in. Detective Sean Monroe entered, his demeanor professional but warm. At 40, with salt and pepper hair and deep brown skin, Monroe had the steady presence of an officer who'd seen everything but retained his humanity. Judge Pierce, he nodded, then turned to Olivia. Ms. Pierce, I've seen you in court. You're doing good work in the PD's office. Olivia seemed surprised by the recognition but nodded her thanks. Detective Monroe is leading the investigation into Sullivan and Hayes. Malcolm explained. What brings you here in person, Detective? I wasn't expecting an update until tomorrow. Monroe's expression turned grim. Something's come up that couldn't wait. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before handing it to Malcolm. This was posted on several social media platforms an hour ago. It's gaining traction rapidly. Malcolm looked at the screen, Olivia leaning in beside him. It showed a video, heavily edited from what Malcolm could tell immediately, of his traffic stop. But the narrative it constructed was vastly different from reality. The clip began mid-interaction, with Malcolm's voice raised saying, "Do you know who I am?" It then cut to him, appearing to resist as Sullivan attempted to restrain him, before jumping to Sullivan's voice saying, "Stop resisting!" The video ended before any actual assault was visible. The caption above the video read entitled "Judge plays race card during routine traffic stop, resists arrest." This is the systemic racism they keep crying about. Malcolm's blood ran cold. This is doctored. They've cut out the beginning where they pulled me over without cause, removed the part where Sullivan assaulted me. I know. Monroe interrupted gently. I've seen the full footage. But this version is what's circulating. It already has over 50,000 views, and the police union just issued a statement supporting Sullivan and Hayes, claiming they showed remarkable restraint in dealing with an aggressive and uncooperative subject who attempted to use his position to avoid a legitimate traffic stop. Olivia's hand found Malcolm's shoulder, squeezing tightly. They're getting ahead of the story, controlling the narrative. Exactly, Monroe confirmed. The DA wanted me to warn you. Things are about to get very public very fast, and not on your terms. Malcolm set the phone down, mind racing. The carefully constructed investigation, the methodical gathering of evidence, all potentially compromised by this preemptive strike. We need to release the full video, Olivia said.
Now.
Before their version becomes the accepted truth. Monroe nodded. That's what I recommended to Carter. He's preparing a press statement, but wanted your input first, given your position. Malcolm stood, pacing to the window that overlooked downtown Manhattan. The city sprawled below, indifferent to the personal drama unfolding in his chambers. How many similar dramas played out daily, he wondered, involving those without his resources or platform. Release it, he decided, turning back to face them. The full unedited video, alongside the traffic camera footage proving I made a complete stop. And I want to make a statement as well. Monroe's eyebrows rose slightly. You sure about that, Judge? Once you go public, there's no controlling where this goes. The NYPD union is powerful, with allies throughout the city government and media. I'm sure, Malcolm said, resolve hardening within him. They're trying to paint me as playing the race card, as if racial profiling and police brutality are some kind of game. I won't be silent while they distort the truth." Olivia's expression reflected pride mixed with concern. "Dad, this could affect your position on the bench. The Judicial Ethics Committee will have to understand that I'm acting not just as a judge, but as a citizen whose rights were violated." Malcolm finished. "Some things transcend professional considerations, Olivia." Monroe nodded, seeming to approve of Malcolm's decision. "I'll inform Carter. His office can coordinate with yours on the press release." He paused, expression turning serious again. "And Judge Pierce, I'd recommend increasing your security measures. Cases like this, they can bring out extremists on both sides." After Monroe left, Olivia turned to her father. "He's right, Dad. If you do this, you're not just challenging those two officers. You're challenging the entire system they represent." Malcolm thought of his swollen lip, the bruise still visible on his cheekbone, despite Eleanor's careful application of concealer. Before he returned to the bench, he thought of the countless cases that had come before him involving police testimony. How many times had he given officers the benefit of the doubt when defendants claimed mistreatment? "It's time someone did," he said finally. The press conference took place the following afternoon on the courthouse steps. Malcolm stood before a forest of microphones, Carter to his right, his attorney, a renowned civil rights lawyer named Elaine Washington, to his left. Olivia and Eleanor watched from the sidelines, their presence a silent testament of support. 3 nights ago, Malcolm began, his voice carrying across the assembled reporters and curious onlookers. "I was driving home from my chambers when I was pulled over by Officers Richard Sullivan and Marcus Hayes of the NYPD. The stated reason for this stop was that I had failed to come to a complete stop at an intersection, an allegation now proven false by traffic camera footage." He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep across the crowd, noting the television cameras capturing every word. What followed was not a professional interaction between law enforcement and a citizen, but an escalating series of provocations culminating in Officer Sullivan physically assaulting me, splitting my lip, bruising my face, and violating not just NYPD protocols, but my fundamental civil rights. Flashbulbs erupted as photographers captured his still visible injuries. Malcolm continued, undeterred. "A heavily edited version of this encounter has been circulating on social media, attempting to portray me as combative and entitled. Today, we are releasing the full, unedited video of the incident, which clearly shows the unprovoked assault and gives lie to these mischaracterizations." Carter stepped forward, detailing the charges being filed against Sullivan and Hayes: assault, filing false reports, civil rights violations, and the evidence supporting each charge. When he finished, Elaine Washington outlined the civil lawsuit being filed simultaneously against the officers and the NYPD. Then came the questions, a barrage from all directions. "Judge Pierce, do you believe this incident was racially motivated?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. "I believe that Officers Sullivan and Hayes saw a black man driving an expensive vehicle in an affluent neighborhood and made assumptions based on that observation rather than any actual violation of law. Whether they would characterize their motivations as racial is irrelevant. The impact of their actions speaks for itself. Will you continue to preside over cases involving NYPD testimony?" A more complicated question, touching on judicial ethics. "I will recuse myself from cases directly involving Officers Sullivan and Hayes, as well as any cases where my impartiality might reasonably be questioned. However, I reject the notion that seeking accountability for police misconduct somehow renders me incapable of impartial judgment in all police matters." The police union claims you're using your position to turn a routine traffic stop into a political statement. Your response? Malcolm felt heat rise in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "I would invite the union representatives to watch the unedited video and explain which part of an officer striking a compliant citizen in the face constitutes routine. This isn't about politics. It's about accountability, something that should transcend partisan divisions." The questions continued for nearly an hour, until Carter signaled it was time to conclude. As Malcolm stepped away from the microphones, a reporter called out one final question.
Judge Pierce!
Are you prepared for the backlash this will cause? The question lingered in the air as Malcolm turned back toward the cameras, his expression grave. The more important question, he replied, is whether the system is prepared for the change this demands. By nightfall, the video had gone viral, the unedited footage playing on every major news network and streaming across social media platforms. Judge Pierce and 5 police brutality trended nationally, alongside Back the Blue from supporters of Sullivan and Hayes. The battle lines were drawn, and Malcolm Pierce, a man who'd built his career on careful deliberation and measured words, found himself at the center of America's most volatile debate. 2 weeks after the press conference, the consequences of Malcolm's decision to go public reverberated throughout his professional and personal life. The full video had indeed sparked national conversation, with many expressing outrage at Sullivan's conduct. Civil rights organizations rallied behind Malcolm, holding demonstrations demanding police accountability, but the backlash Carter had warned about materialized with equal force. The police union held its own press conference, portraying Sullivan and Hayes as dedicated officers being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. Conservative commentators questioned Malcolm's judicial impartiality, suggesting he had an agenda that compromised his ability to serve on the bench. More concerning were the threats. Malcolm's chambers received dozens of calls and emails containing racial slurs and explicit threats of violence. The courthouse enhanced security, installing additional metal detectors and posting officers outside his courtroom. Malcolm tried to maintain his normal routine, but the weight of constant vigilance took its toll. He found himself checking his rearview mirror more frequently, startling at unexpected sounds, scanning restaurant interiors before being seated. "You need to take some time off," Eleanor urged over dinner at his apartment, where they'd gathered with Olivia to discuss the latest developments. At 50, Eleanor retained the grace and poise that had first attracted him decades ago, though her once dark hair now featured elegant streaks of silver. At least until things calmed down. Malcolm shook his head, setting down his fork. Taking leave would send the wrong message, that I've done something requiring retreat, or that I can be intimidated into stepping back. "It's not about the message, Dad," Olivia interjected. "It's about your safety. I've been monitoring some of these right-wing forums. The rhetoric is getting increasingly violent." Malcolm reached for his wine glass, using the moment to gather his thoughts. The investigation was proceeding. Sullivan and Hayes remained on paid administrative leave pending internal and criminal investigations. But history suggested the officers would likely face minimal consequences, if any. "I can't back down now," he said finally. "Not when we're finally seeing movement." The governor called yesterday about serving on a new commission to reform police accountability measures. Eleanor's expression remained concerned. "Reform won't matter if you're not here to see it implemented." Before Malcolm could respond, his phone rang. Carter's number. He excused himself to take the call in his study. "Anthony, it's late. What's happening?" Carter's voice was tight with tension. "We have a problem. A big one. Sullivan's attorney just submitted new evidence in his defense. Security camera footage, allegedly showing you in a heated argument with someone outside a restaurant last year. The claim is that the man filed a police report stating you threatened him, but it was buried due to your position." Malcolm's mind raced, trying to place the incident. "That's absurd. I've never threatened anyone." "The footage looks authentic, Malcolm. It shows someone who looks like you in what appears to be a confrontation. The timestamp matches a night when you attended a Judicial Association dinner at Le Bernardin. I remember that night. There was no confrontation. Well, the NYPD has conveniently discovered a buried police report that says otherwise. Sullivan's attorney is claiming you have a history of aggressive behavior that's been covered up, and that Sullivan was responding to legitimate threatening behavior during your traffic stop." Malcolm sank into his desk chair. The implications clear. "They're fabricating evidence to discredit me." "It looks that way. The footage is grainy enough that it's difficult to conclusively identify you, but similar enough to raise doubts. They're already leaking it to sympathetic media outlets. This is retaliation, Anthony. Sullivan and his union trying to destroy my credibility. rather than face accountability. I know. Carter sighed heavily, but it's effective. The Judicial Ethics Committee has already received calls demanding an investigation into the alleged covered-up incident. Malcolm's free hand curled into a fist. Fight it. This is a transparent attempt to shift focus from Sullivan's conduct. We're trying. But Malcolm, this is getting ugly. These people play dirty, and they have resources and connections throughout the system. Be prepared for more of this. After ending the call, Malcolm returned to the dining room, where Eleanor and Olivia waited expectantly. He relayed Carter's information, watching their expressions shift from shock to outrage. That's insane. Olivia exploded. They're literally manufacturing evidence. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, asked the more immediate question. Can they prove it's not you in the footage? Carter's team is investigating. They'll check my whereabouts that night, see if there are better quality security videos from the restaurant that show I never left during the dinner. Olivia stood, pacing the dining room. This is exactly how the system protects itself. When they can't defend the indefensible, they attack the victim's character. Her voice cracked with fury. How many of my clients have faced exactly this kind of character assassination when they dared to complain about police misconduct? Malcolm nodded grimly. The difference is, I have the resources and platform to fight back. Most victims don't. The doorbell rang, startling all three of them. Malcolm checked his phone. His building security app showed a uniformed officer standing at the entrance. Stay here, he instructed, moving to the intercom. Yes, Judge Pierce, Detective Monroe, I need to speak with you urgently. Malcolm buzzed him up, opening the door as Monroe emerged from the elevator. The detective's expression was grave. What's happened? Malcolm asked, leading him into the apartment. Monroe nodded respectfully to Eleanor and Olivia before turning back to Malcolm. Someone firebombed your chambers tonight. Around 9 p.m., Eleanor gasped. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. Was anyone hurt? Malcolm asked, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. No. Security caught it on camera. A masked figure broke a window and threw what appears to be a Molotov cocktail inside. The sprinkler system activated immediately, so the damage is mostly from smoke and water, not fire. Do you have the perpetrator in custody? Monroe shook his head. They escaped before security could respond. We're reviewing footage from street cameras now. Malcolm's legs suddenly felt unsteady. He lowered himself into a chair, Eleanor immediately moving to his side. The timing is unlikely to be coincidental. Monroe continued, coming hours after Sullivan's team released that doctored security footage. I think someone's sending you a message, Judge. A message that they're willing to burn down a courthouse to protect corrupt officers. Olivia said bitterly. Monroe's expression remained professional, but Malcolm caught the flash of agreement in his eyes. We've stationed additional officers around your building tonight, but I'd recommend considering relocation to a more secure location for the time being. This is my home, Malcolm said firmly. I won't be driven out by intimidation tactics. Monroe nodded, respecting his decision even if he didn't agree with it. Then at least accept additional security measures. I can arrange for a patrol car to remain stationed outside. After the detective left, promising updates as the investigation progressed, a heavy silence fell over the apartment. Eleanor broke it first, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. Malcolm, this has gone beyond professional consequences. They've escalated to violence. Mom's right, Olivia added, pacing again. First they try to destroy your reputation, and when that doesn't silence you immediately, they resort to arson. What's next? Malcolm stared out the window at the city lights, considering the trajectory of events. In just 2 weeks, he'd gone from respected jurist to polarizing symbol in America's ongoing struggle with racism and police accountability. The path ahead was fraught with danger, yet turning back seemed equally impossible. What would you have me do? He asked quietly. Withdraw the complaint. Recant my testimony. Let Sullivan and Hayes continue their pattern of abuse against others who lack my resources to fight back. Of course not, Eleanor said, moving to stand beside him. But there must be a way to pursue justice without putting yourself directly in the crosshairs. Malcolm turned to face them both, his expression resolute. When I became a judge, I swore an oath to uphold justice, not just in my courtroom, but in society. What message would it send if I, with all my privilege and position, backed down in the face of intimidation? Olivia's expression softened. The same message sent to every black person who's been told to be quiet for their own safety while injustice continues unchallenged. Exactly. Malcolm reached out, taking both their hands in his. I can't stop now, but I need you both to be careful as well. Whoever is behind this might not stop at targeting me. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eleanor squeezed his hand before releasing it. I'll stay here tonight, she decided. The guest room is still made up, I assume. Malcolm nodded, grateful for her presence despite their divorce. Eleanor had always been his rock, pragmatic and steady when his righteous anger threatened to overwhelm his judgment. That night, sleep eluded Malcolm. He lay awake, mind churning through possibilities and contingencies. Around 3 a.m., he finally gave up, padding quietly to his study to review case files for the following day's docket. His phone buzzed with a notification, an email from an unknown sender. Against his better judgment, Malcolm opened it. The message contained a single line of text, "Back off or she's next," followed by a photo taken that afternoon of Olivia leaving the public defender's office. Malcolm's blood ran cold. His hands trembled as he immediately dialed Monroe's number. Protocol be damned. This was no longer about him. They had threatened his daughter. The line had been crossed. The morning news cycle exploded with reports of the courthouse firebombing, speculation about its connection to Malcolm's case against Officers Sullivan and Hayes dominating every channel. Malcolm watched grimly from Monroe's office at the precinct, where he'd been since 4 a.m., after reporting the threat against Olivia. "We've assigned protection to Ms. Pierce," Monroe assured him, returning with 2 cups of coffee. "She's being escorted to and from work, and there's a plainclothes officer monitoring her building." Malcolm nodded, accepting the coffee with murmured thanks. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of the sleepless night, and the email. Cybercrimes is tracing it, but it was sent through multiple proxies. Whoever did this knows how to cover their tracks. Monroe sat across from him. "Judge Pierce, I need to ask, have you received any other threats you haven't reported?" Malcolm hesitated before answering truthfully. "Generic hate mail to my chambers, yes. Nothing specific or credible until now, nothing targeting my family." "This represents a significant escalation," Monroe said, stating the obvious. "These aren't just angry citizens venting frustration. This is coordinated intimidation, possibly involving people with access to resources and information." "People like corrupt police officers, you mean?" Monroe didn't deny it. "I've been a detective for 15 years. I've seen how certain officers operate when they feel threatened. Not everyone wears the badge with honor." Malcolm studied the detective, curiosity temporarily displacing his exhaustion. "Why are you helping me, Detective Monroe? You must be facing pressure from within your department." A wry smile crossed Monroe's face. "Let's just say I've had my own experiences with officers like Sullivan. 20 years ago, before I joined the force, I was that black kid being slammed against a car for fitting a description. I became a cop to change the system from within." His expression turned serious again. "But change only happens when people in positions of power, like yourself, are willing to stand up." Before Malcolm could respond, Monroe's phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting as he listened. "Win?" he asked sharply. "And you're certain?" Another pause. "Lock it down. No one in or out until I get there." He ended the call, turning to Malcolm with grim determination. "What is it?" Malcolm asked, dread pooling in his stomach. "There's been a break-in at your chambers. Security discovered it an hour ago." "Was anything taken?" "That's not clear yet, but they left something behind." Monroe hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "A doll. A black doll with a noose around its neck, and your daughter's name written across its chest." Malcolm's coffee cup crashed to the floor, hot liquid splashing across the tile. The message couldn't be clearer. A lynching threat against Olivia. His vision blurred with a combination of fear and rage. This was no longer about professional intimidation. This was a direct threat to his child's life. "I need to see her," he managed, already standing. "I'll drive you," Monroe said, The patrol car will meet us at her office. The drive passed intense silence, Malcolm's mind racing through worst-case scenarios and potential responses. His phone buzzed constantly. Carter, Eleanor, his clerk, reporters seeking comment on the firebombing. He ignored them all, focused solely on ensuring Olivia's safety. They arrived at the public defender's office, where a uniformed officer waited outside. Monroe identified himself, and they were escorted upstairs to Olivia's small office. She looked up as they entered, confusion quickly turning to concern when she saw her father's expression. "Dade, what's wrong? I just saw the news about your chambers." Malcolm crossed the room, enveloping her in a tight embrace. Over her shoulder, he nodded for Monroe to explain the situation. As the detective outlined the threat, Olivia's body tensed, but she didn't pull away from her father's embrace. When Monroe finished, she finally stepped back, her expression a mirror of Malcolm's own determination. "So they're targeting me to get to you," she summarized, "hoping you'll drop the case if your daughter's in danger." "It's working," Malcolm admitted, his voice rough. "I won't put you at risk, Olivia." She shook her head firmly. "No, absolutely not. You can't back down now, Dad." "That's exactly what they want. This isn't about principle anymore," Malcolm argued. "This is about your safety. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to commit arson. A lynching threat isn't something we can ignore, and I'm not suggesting we ignore it," Olivia countered. "We take precautions, accept protection. But you cannot drop this case. The moment you do, you send the message that their tactics work. That threatening family members is an effective way to silence those who stand up against police brutality." Monroe, who had been observing their exchange, cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt, but there's another option we need to discuss. Judge Pierce, given the escalation, we should consider putting you and your family in protective custody until we identify who's behind these threats." Malcolm turned to the detective. "Protective custody? For how long?" "Days. Months. This case could drag on for years." "We don't need protection," Olivia stated firmly. "We need these corrupt officers and whoever is helping them exposed and held accountable." She turned to her father. "You told me this was about more than just one incident, that it was about changing the system. Did you mean that, or was it just rhetoric?" Malcolm stared at his daughter, seeing in her the same unflinching commitment to justice that had defined his own career. Pride mingled with fear in a painful combination. "Of course I meant it," he said quietly, "but not at the cost of your safety. My safety is already compromised just by existing as a black woman in America, Dad. You've always known that. It's why you were so worried when I decided to become a public defender." Olivia's voice softened. "I face danger every day, representing clients against a system designed to crush them. The difference now is that we're fighting back together, with resources and visibility many victims never have." Malcolm looked from his daughter to Monroe, weighing options and consequences. Finally, he nodded slowly. "We'll accept protection," he decided, "but we continue the fight. No backing down." Monroe seemed relieved by the decision. "I'll coordinate with the department to establish round-the-clock security for both of you. And Judge, I think it's time we widen the investigation. These threats, the firebombing, the doctored evidence, they suggest organization and resources beyond what Sullivan and Hayes would have access to on their own. The police union," Malcolm suggested, "possibly, or higher." Monroe lowered his voice. "Precinct captains, maybe even someone in the commissioner's office. Sullivan and Hayes have been protected through 6 previous complaints. That doesn't happen without powerful allies." Malcolm absorbed this sobering assessment. "So we're potentially taking on not just 2 officers, but a network of corruption within the NYPD. "That's my read of the situation," Monroe confirmed, "which makes the threats against your daughter all the more concerning. These aren't just angry cops lashing out. This is systematic intimidation." Olivia's expression remained resolute. "Then we need to be systematic in our response. Dad, you have the platform and connections. I have expertise in criminal defense. Detective Monroe has insider knowledge of NYPD operations. Together, we can expose this network." Malcolm studied his daughter, seeing not just determination but calculation in her expression. "You've been thinking about this," Since the night you were assaulted, she admitted. This was never going to stop with Sullivan and Hayes. The system protects its own. We've both seen it from different sides of the courtroom. The only way to create real change is to expose the entire corrupt infrastructure. The strategy meeting at Elaine Washington's office later that day brought together the core team, now committed to what had evolved from a simple assault case into an investigation of systemic corruption. Malcolm, Olivia, Monroe, Carter, and Washington sat around a conference table spread with documents, digital evidence, and case files. The threats change our approach, Washington said, tapping a pen against the table thoughtfully. They give us grounds to expand discovery beyond Sullivan and Hayes to include anyone potentially involved in the intimidation campaign. Carter nodded. I've already drafted subpoenas for precinct communications, union leadership emails, and the personnel files of every officer who's partnered with Sullivan over the past decade. They'll fight those subpoenas tooth and nail. Olivia pointed out, claim it's a fishing expedition. Which is why we need to establish a pattern, Monroe interjected. Sullivan has 6 prior complaints, all dismissed. We need to find those complainants, see if they also faced intimidation, or if evidence in their cases mysteriously disappeared. Malcolm leaned forward. And we need to identify who Sullivan and Hayes report to. Formally and informally. Who protects them? Who benefits from their actions? Washington made notes as they spoke. I'll assign my team to background research on every superior officer in their chain of command, looking for connections, conflicts of interest, unusual financial activities. Speaking of financial activities, Monroe added, we should follow the money. Police unions collect dues from every officer. Where does that money go? Who controls those funds? Are they being used to finance intimidation campaigns against critics? The strategy session continued for hours, mapping out an approach that balanced aggression with caution. They were taking on powerful interests with extensive resources and connections. The risk of retaliation remained high. As they prepared to leave, each with assignments and deadlines, Carter pulled Malcolm aside. The Judicial Ethics Committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss the allegations in that doctored security footage. He said quietly, I've submitted evidence proving you were at the dinner throughout the time frame in question, but they still have to go through the motions. Malcolm finished, unsurprised. Let them investigate. I have nothing to hide. Carter looked uncomfortable. There's more. The committee received an anonymous complaint alleging you've demonstrated anti-police bias in your rulings over the past 5 years. They're examining your case history for patterns. Malcolm felt a surge of cold anger. My rulings are a matter of public record. I've ruled both for and against police testimony based on the evidence presented in each individual case. I know that, Carter assured him. But the complaint is designed to create doubt about your impartiality, to suggest this whole case is driven by pre-existing bias rather than legitimate grievances. It was another front in the ongoing battle to discredit him, attack his professional reputation, his personal safety, his family, and now his judicial record. The comprehensive nature of the campaign reinforced Monroe's assessment. They weren't fighting individual bad actors, but an entrenched system with tentacles throughout the city's power structures. Let them look, Malcolm said finally. My record speaks for itself. In the meantime, we press forward with the expanded investigation. As they left the building, flanked by security provided by both the NYPDS under Monroe's supervision and private contractors hired by Washington's firm, Malcolm reflected on how quickly his life had transformed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a respected jurist with a comfortable routine. Now he moved through the city with security details, faced threats to his family, and found himself at the center of a widening corruption investigation. The personal cost was already substantial, but as he caught Olivia's determined expression as she entered the secure vehicle ahead of him, Malcolm knew there could be no retreat. This fight had chosen him, not the reverse, and justice demanded he see it through, whatever the consequences. That evening, as Malcolm reviewed documents in his apartment under the watchful eye of security personnel, his phone rang with Eleanor's number. Are you and Olivia all right? She asked immediately. I've been watching the news. They're saying there's been another threat. Malcolm glanced toward his daughter, who was working on her laptop across the living room. We're safe. Monroe has arranged protection for both of us. This is spiraling out of control, Malcolm. Eleanor's voice tightened with worry. First they attack you, then threaten our daughter, and now I hear they're questioning your judicial record. It's a coordinated campaign to discredit and intimidate us. Malcolm confirmed. But we're pushing back. In fact, we're expanding the investigation to include whoever is orchestrating these threats. The line went quiet for a moment. Is that wise? Escalating further. What choice do we have? Retreat means Sullivan and Hayes face no consequences, and the system continues unchallenged. How many more black citizens will face what I did, or worse? I understand that, Eleanor said softly. I've always supported your commitment to justice, Malcolm. It's one of the things I most admired about you. But this feels different, more dangerous. Malcolm considered her words, knowing the fear behind them was legitimate. It is dangerous, but necessary. After they spoke a while longer about practical security arrangements, Malcolm ended the call and joined Olivia in the living room. Mum's worried, he said unnecessarily. Olivia nodded without looking up from her computer. She has reason to be. I've been reviewing Sullivan's previous complaints. There's a pattern, Dad, and it's ugly. She turned her laptop toward him, revealing a spreadsheet she'd compiled. 6 complaints, spanning 8 years, all involving excessive force against minorities, all dismissed despite evidence supporting the complainant's accounts. But here's where it gets interesting. She continued, highlighting several rows. 2 of the complainants subsequently faced criminal charges themselves. 1 for drug possession, 1 for assault on an officer. Both cases relied heavily on testimony from officers in Sullivan's precinct. Both resulted in convictions. Malcolm leaned closer, studying the data. They retaliated against the complainants by manufacturing charges. It looks that way. I've requested the full case files, but the pattern is clear. File a complaint against Sullivan, find yourself facing criminal charges shortly thereafter. The implications were chilling. Not just individual corrupt officers, but a system that actively protected them by criminalizing their accusers. And the other complainants? Malcolm asked. One withdrew his complaint after his brother was arrested on outstanding warrants. One moved out of state suddenly. One I can't locate at all. He seems to have disappeared from public records after his complaint was dismissed. Malcolm's jaw tightened. We need to find these people, get their stories. Already working on it, Olivia assured him. Washington's firm has investigators trying to track them down, but it won't be easy. These people have good reason to stay hidden. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of the security officers entered after Malcolm called permission. Judge Pierce, there's a delivery for you. We've scanned it. It appears to be a USB drive in a padded envelope. No explosives or hazardous materials detected. Malcolm exchanged a glance with Olivia. Bring it in. The officer handed him the envelope. Plain, with Malcolm's name and address typed on a label. No return address. Inside was a simple USB drive with no markings. This could be anything, Olivia warned. Malware, more threats, doctored evidence meant to discredit you further. Or it could be something someone wants us to see, but is afraid to send through official channels. Malcolm countered. He turned to the security officer. Do we have a clean laptop? Something not connected to any networks or personal accounts. 20 minutes later, they had a standalone laptop set up. Malcolm inserted the USB drive, tensing slightly as the computer recognized it and displayed its contents. A single video file. He clicked play, and the screen filled with footage from what appeared to be a body camera. The timestamp showed a date 3 years earlier. The camera's perspective moved through a precinct hallway into a small room where 3 officers sat around a table. One was unmistakably Sullivan, younger but with the same hard eyes. Is this recording? One officer asked, looking toward the camera. Now it's off, replied the voice from the camera's wearer. Just charging it before shift. Sullivan laughed. Rookie mistake, Johnson. Never leave these things plugged in. They can activate automatically. The conversation continued, casual at first. Complaints about shifts, gossip about colleagues. Then Sullivan leaned forward. So the review board interviewed me about that stop last week. The one with the mouthy kid from Harlem. What you tell them? Another officer asked. Sullivan smirked. Same as always. Kid resisted, feared for my safety, followed protocol. Captain Reeves backed me up as usual. That's like what? The fourth complaint this year? Johnson asked, sounding nervous. Fifth, Sullivan corrected, but none of them stick. Reeves makes sure of that. Why's he protect you so much? Johnson pressed. The third officer, silent until now, cut in, because Sullivan here does the dirty work Reeves needs done but can't be officially connected to. Right, Rick? Sullivan's expression darkened slightly. Shut up, Martinez. Johnson doesn't need to know about that arrangement. What arrangement? Johnson's voice held genuine confusion. Sullivan stood, moving toward the camera. Let's just say certain neighborhoods need extra policing that doesn't always fit department guidelines. Reeves understands that, appreciates officers willing to be proactive. The video ended abruptly there. Malcolm and Olivia sat in stunned silence for several seconds. Captain Reeves, Olivia finally said. That's Sullivan's precinct captain, right? Malcolm nodded slowly, and apparently his protector. This suggests an established pattern of Sullivan acting as Reeves' enforcer, with complaints systematically buried. Who sent this? Olivia wondered, examining the envelope again. And why now? Someone within the department who's uncomfortable with what's happening, but fears retaliation if they come forward openly. Malcolm guessed. Johnson, maybe, the rookie wearing the camera. We need to identify Johnson and the other officer, Martinez. Olivia said, already making notes. And we need to find everything we can on Captain Reeves. This video suggests the corruption goes at least to his level. Malcolm carefully ejected the USB drive. We need to get this to Monroe and Carter immediately, and Washington's team needs to add Reeves to their investigation. As Olivia began making calls, Malcolm stared at the small drive in his palm. Someone had taken an enormous risk to provide this evidence. The conspiracy they were unraveling extended beyond Sullivan and Hayes to include at least a precinct captain. How much further did it go? And how many more people might be endangered as they pursued the truth? The next day brought chaos as the video leaked to the media. Malcolm had shared it only with his core team, but someone, likely attempting to ensure the evidence couldn't be buried, had forwarded it to multiple news outlets. By morning, Captain Reeves' face was splashed across every screen in the city, alongside Sullivan's, with analysts and commentators dissecting every word of the damning conversation. The NYPD commissioner called an emergency press conference, announcing Reeves' immediate suspension pending investigation and promising a departmental review of all complaints processed under his command. The police union responded with its own statement, calling the video selectively edited and lacking context, while demanding due process for the officers involved. Malcolm watched these developments from Carter's office, where an emergency strategy session had been convened. This changes everything, Carter said, gesturing toward the television. The commissioner can't ignore evidence this damning, not when it's being played on every channel. Monroe nodded grimly. Reeves has powerful friends, but they'll distance themselves now. No one wants to be seen defending that kind of explicit corruption. What about the threats against Judge Pierce and Olivia? Washington asked, does the video give us any leads on who might be behind them? Not directly, Monroe admitted, but I've identified Officer Johnson, the rookie whose camera recorded the conversation. Kevin Johnson left the force 18 months ago. I'm trying to locate him now. Malcolm, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. We need to move quickly. Whoever sent that video took an enormous risk. If they're identified before we can offer protection, the implications hung in the air. The same people who had threatened Olivia, firebombed Malcolm's chambers, and planted false evidence wouldn't hesitate to silence a potential witness. I have another concern, Olivia interjected. This video proves Sullivan operates with protection from above. What if the threats against us come from the same source? What if Reeves is behind the intimidation campaign? Carter considered this. It's possible. The resources and information required to doctor that security footage, to know Olivia's schedule, to access the courthouse for the firebombing. Those suggest someone with authority and connections. If that's true, Washington said slowly, then Reeves' suspension might actually escalate the danger. He's cornered now, with nothing left to lose. A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed this sobering possibility. The victory of exposing Reeves might have inadvertently increased the threat. Monroe's phone rang, breaking the tension. He stepped away to answer, his expression shifting from professional detachment to alarm as the conversation progressed. "Win," he demanded into the phone, "and you're certain?" After listening a moment longer, he ended the call and turned to the group, his face grim. "That was my partner. Officer Kevin Johnson was just found in his apartment. Dead, gunshot wound to the head, staged to look like suicide." The words landed like physical blows. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, a wave of guilt washing over him. Another life lost in this widening vortex of corruption and violence. "He was our source," Olivia said quietly. "He sent the USB drive." "Almost certainly," Monroe agreed, "and someone figured it out and silenced him before he could testify." Carter stood, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the commissioner directly. This just became a homicide investigation tied to police corruption. We need a task force with officers from outside Reeves' chain of command." As Carter stepped away to make his call, Washington turned to Malcolm and Olivia. "This confirms our worst fears about the extent of the corruption and the lengths they'll go to protect themselves. You both need to relocate immediately to a secure location that not even the NYPD knows about." Malcolm nodded, the weight of responsibility for Johnson's death heavy on his shoulders. "What about Eleanor? If they're targeting family members, I'll arrange protection for her too," Washington promised. "My firm has a secure property upstate used for high-risk witnesses. Private security, no connection to law enforcement." Monroe returned to the conversation. "I should recuse myself from the official investigation now. If Reeves and his allies realize I've been helping you, I could be compromised or targeted next. Or you could be our inside connection to the investigation," Olivia suggested. "With proper precautions, of course." Before they could discuss further, Malcolm's phone rang, an unknown number. Something made him put it on speaker as he answered. "Judge Pierce," came a voice, electronically distorted beyond recognition. "You should have backed off when you had the chance." Malcolm exchanged alarmed glances with the others. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what happens to people who challenge the system. Someone who knows your daughter is at the DA's office right now, thinking she's safe with her security detail." Malcolm's blood ran cold. Olivia had stepped out 30 minutes earlier to retrieve files from Carter's assistant. "If you've threatened my daughter," Malcolm began, but the voice cut him off. "No threats, just reality. Check your email. Judge, you have 1 hour to announce you're dropping all charges and retracting your accusations. Otherwise, the next body they find won't be some ex-cop no one cares about." The call ended. Monroe was already on his phone, barking orders to locate and secure Olivia immediately. Malcolm's hands shook as he opened his email on his phone. A new message contained a single video attachment. With dread coiling in his stomach, he played it. The footage showed Olivia walking down the hallway of the DA's building, security detail flanking her. Then the camera angle shifted, revealing the view was being shot through a rifle scope, crosshairs centered on Olivia's back. "My God," Washington breathed, looking over his shoulder at the video. "They're watching her right now. And they want us to know it," Malcolm said, his voice hollow with fear. "This isn't just intimidation anymore. This is a direct threat of assassination if we don't back down." The hour that followed was the longest of Malcolm's life. Monroe coordinated with NYPD SWAT to secure the DA's building and extract Olivia safely while Washington's private security team prepared for their relocation. Carter had the commissioner on speaker, authorizing an emergency task force with federal oversight to investigate the threats and Johnson's murder. Malcolm paced Carter's office, checking his watch compulsively as the deadline approached. The anonymous caller had demanded a public retraction and withdrawal of all charges. Something Malcolm couldn't bring himself to do, not even with Olivia's life at stake. To capitulate now would mean not just dropping the case against Sullivan and Hayes, but abandoning the wider corruption investigation that had already cost Johnson his life. Justice demanded he stand firm, but could he prioritize justice over his daughter's safety? The door burst open, and Olivia rushed in, surrounded by heavily armed officers. Malcolm enveloped her in a fierce embrace, relief making his knees weak. "I'm okay," she assured him, though her face was pale with shock after being told about the threat. "They got me out through a service tunnel. No clear shots for a sniper." The deadline passed without Malcolm making any public statement. They waited in tense silence for retaliation, but none came, at least not immediately. "They're recalculating," Monroe suggested. "The show of force around the DA's building, the rapid extraction, they know we're taking the threats seriously and implementing countermeasures. Which buys us time, but doesn't eliminate the danger," Washington pointed out. "We need to get you both to the safe house now, while they're regrouping." As they prepared to leave under heavy guard, Carter pulled Malcolm aside. "The Judicial Ethics Committee expedited their review in light of these threats," he said quietly. "They've cleared you of any wrongdoing regarding that fabricated security footage, but they're requesting you take a leave of absence due to the extraordinary circumstances affecting your safety and potentially your impartiality." Malcolm had expected something like this. In other words, step back voluntarily before they force the issue. Carter nodded apologetically. "Given everything that's happening, it might be for the best. Focus on staying alive and pursuing this corruption investigation. Your seat on the bench will be waiting when this is resolved." Malcolm considered the suggestion, recognizing its practicality even as he chafed at the implied surrender. "All right, I'll take the leave. But make it clear this is temporary and under protest." As they were escorted to armored vehicles for transport to Washington's secure property, Malcolm found himself in the bizarre position of being both victim and central figure in what had become the biggest police corruption scandal in recent New York history. The case had evolved far beyond his initial assault at Sullivan's hands, exposing layers of institutional protection for corrupt officers and raising questions about how high the corruption might reach. The personal cost had been enormous. His safety compromised, his daughter threatened, his professional position temporarily abandoned. Yet even as they drove away from the city under armed guard, Malcolm felt a grim determination hardening within him. This fight had chosen him, thrust upon him that rainy night when Sullivan decided a black man in an expensive car warranted harassment and assault. But Malcolm had chosen to fight back, to use his position and resources to demand accountability. And despite the escalating danger, despite the price already paid, that choice remained firm. The system would not claim another victory through intimidation and violence. Not this time. Not while Malcolm Pierce still had breath to speak truth to power. 3 weeks later, Malcolm sat at the large wooden table in Washington's upstate safe house, surrounded by evidence boards and case files. The rural property, nestled on 30 acres of private woodland, had become their war room, a secure base from which to coordinate the expanding investigation into police corruption. The case had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Johnson's murder had prompted federal involvement, with the FBI joining the task force investigating Reeves, Sullivan, Hayes, and their network of enablers. 6 more officers had been suspended, and the police union had gone conspicuously quiet as evidence mounted of systematic corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power. Most significantly, 3 days after their relocation to the safe house, another anonymous package had arrived at Washington's office. This one containing financial records, showing suspicious payments from a shell company to Captain Reeves, who had then authorized overtime and bonuses to Sullivan, Hayes, and several other officers. The shell company, when investigated, linked back to a property development corporation with city contracts for urban renewal. Projects in predominantly minority neighborhoods. The pattern that emerged was as disturbing as it was illuminating. Developers wanted certain neighborhoods cleared for gentrification, and Reeves deployed Sullivan and his cohort to terrorize residents through excessive policing, arbitrary arrests, and intimidation. Complaints were buried, evidence disappeared, and anyone who persisted faced retaliation. Olivia entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She'd been instrumental in reconstructing the pattern, using her experience as a public defender to identify cases where Sullivan and his associates had manufactured charges against community activists or residents who refused buyout offers from developers. "Any news?" Malcolm asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Olivia nodded, taking the seat across from him. "Monroe just called. They've arrested Dennis Hoffman, the CEO of Urban Renaissance Development. He's the one who's been paying Reeves through that shell company." "Will he talk?" "Monroe thinks so. Hoffman has no loyalty to cops. He was just using them as mercenaries. If prosecutors offer him a deal to avoid racketeering charges, he'll likely give up everyone involved." Malcolm absorbed this update with cautious optimism. "And the threats against us? Any progress identifying who sent that sniper video?" Olivia's expression turned grim. "Nothing concrete yet. But Monroe has a theory that it wasn't Reeves or Sullivan directly. He thinks they contracted it out, possibly to someone with military or specialized law enforcement background. The FBI is analyzing the video for clues about the location and equipment used." Malcolm sipped his coffee, considering the implications. So even with Reeves, Sullivan, and now Hoffman in custody, whoever made that direct threat against you might still be out there. "Which is why we're still here," Olivia confirmed, gesturing to the isolated property. "Washington thinks we should remain at the safe house until everyone involved in the threats is identified and neutralized." The past 3 weeks had been a strange combination of productivity and confinement. While the task force made progress in the city, Malcolm and Olivia had continued their own investigation from a distance, piecing together the network of corruption from case files, financial records, and witness statements collected by Washington's team. Eleanor had joined them for the first week before returning to the city with enhanced security. Unwilling to abandon her therapy practice indefinitely, she checked in daily, providing a much-needed connection to normalcy amid the surreal circumstances. Malcolm's forced leave from the bench had become a blessing in disguise, allowing him to focus entirely on exposing the system that had protected Sullivan for years. The wider implications were staggering. How many similar operations existed in other precincts? How many innocent people had been arrested on manufactured charges? How deep did the corruption run within the NYPD and city government? "Dad." Olivia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you okay? You seemed far away." Malcolm managed a tired smile. "Just contemplating the scope of what we've uncovered. It started with one traffic stop, one assault. Now we're looking at systemic corruption involving police, developers, and possibly city officials. That's how systemic injustice works." Olivia replied, her expression somber. "Individual incidents aren't isolated. They're symptoms of deeper rot. Your assault wasn't random. It was part of a pattern enabled by institutional protection." Their conversation was interrupted by Washington's arrival. The attorney looked exhausted but energized, having just returned from the city with new developments. "We've got movement," she announced, setting her briefcase on the table. Monroe convinced one of the suspended officers, Martinez, from that body camera video, to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Martinez, Malcolm recalled. He was the one who mentioned Sullivan doing dirty work for Reeves. Washington nodded, pulling out documents. "Exactly. And according to Martinez, that dirty work extended well beyond harassment in gentrifying neighborhoods. He claims Sullivan and Hayes were Reeves' enforcers for a variety of unofficial operations, intimidating witnesses in high-profile cases, planting evidence on targeted individuals, and providing protection for certain criminal enterprises that paid for the privilege." "Criminal enterprises?" Olivia leaned forward. "What kind?" "Primarily drug distribution networks that paid to operate without interference in designated areas. Martinez claims Reeves had an arrangement with the Castillo organization. They could operate in certain neighborhoods as long as they paid tax and kept violence to a minimum." Malcolm's jaw tightened. So while Sullivan and Hayes were terrorizing innocent black and brown residents for driving nice cars or walking in wrong neighborhoods, they were simultaneously allowing actual criminal activity to flourish, as long as the price was right, Washington confirmed. Martinez has provided bank records showing suspicious deposits coinciding with meetings between Reeves and Castillo lieutenants. The revelations were sickening, but not entirely surprising. Malcolm had seen this pattern throughout his career. Aggressive policing focused on communities of color, while certain crimes received selective enforcement or willful blindness. How does this connect to the threats against us? Olivia asked the question foremost in Malcolm's mind. Washington hesitated. That's where things get complicated. Martinez claims he doesn't know who executed the threats, but he believes they weren't just about silencing Judge Pierce, about the initial assault. Once you started digging and expanding the investigation, you threatened multiple revenue streams and protection rackets. So the escalation from intimidation to outright death threats reflects the increasing stakes. Washington finished. Sullivan's assault was personal, racist and abusive, but relatively small scale in the larger corruption scheme. By pursuing it doggedly, you accidentally pulled on a thread that's unraveling multiple criminal enterprises and potentially millions in illicit profits. The implication was clear. As the investigation expanded, so did the number of people with motivation to silence them. This wasn't just corrupt cops trying to avoid accountability anymore. It was powerful criminal interests, fighting to protect their operations and freedom. What happens next? Malcolm asked. The FBI has taken over the threat assessment, Washington explained, with Martinez's testimony implicating the Castillo organization. This has become a federal racketeering investigation. They're executing search warrants on properties connected to Reeves and Castillo associates as we speak. Olivia's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She checked the screen and frowned. It's Monroe. She put the call on speaker. Detective, you're on with all of us. Monroe's voice came through, tense and hurried. Is the property secure? All security protocols in place. Washington exchanged alarmed glances with Malcolm and Olivia. Yes. Why? What's happened? We're just arrested Hayes. During questioning, he let slip that someone on the task force has been feeding information to Reeves' people. We don't know who, but they may know your location. Malcolm felt ice spreading through his veins. How recent is this breach? Unclear. But I'm sending additional security to your location immediately. Trusted officers from outside the original task force. Don't open the gates for anyone without direct confirmation from me. After the call ended, Washington immediately activated enhanced security measures. Motion sensors throughout the property perimeter, armed guards on rotation, and preparations for potential evacuation. Malcolm watched these emergency procedures unfold with a strange sense of detachment. From the moment Sullivan had struck him that rainy night, each step in this journey had seemed simultaneously shocking and inevitable. A cascade of revelation and danger that carried its own terrible momentum. This feels like the endgame, he said quietly to Olivia as they waited in the main house while security teams swept the grounds. They're cornered now. Whatever happens next will be decisive, she finished, her voice steady despite the fear he knew she must feel. But we're prepared, Dad. And we're not alone anymore. This isn't just our fight now. It's a federal investigation with resources and authority behind it. Malcolm nodded, drawing strength from his daughter's resolve. She was right. What had begun as his solitary stand against police brutality had evolved into something much larger, with allies throughout law enforcement, the justice system, and the media. Night fell over the property, the darkness beyond the windows seeming to press against the glass. Malcolm found sleep impossible, instead reviewing case files in the study while security patrols moved across the grounds. Around 2 a.m., Washington joined him, carrying 2 glasses of bourbon. Can't sleep either, she asked, offering him one of the glasses. Malcolm accepted with a grateful nod. Too much adrenaline, and too many possibilities to consider. Washington settled into the chair across from him. I just spoke with the U.S. attorney. The case against Reeves, Sullivan, and the Castillo organization is solid. Martinez's testimony, the financial records, the body camera footage. It's enough for multiple indictments, regardless of what happens next. That's something at least. Malcolm sipped the bourbon, appreciating its warmth. If something happens to us, the case continues, Washington assured him. That's what they don't understand. This has grown beyond any individual now. It's institutional, systematic. The Department of Justice is involved, Oversight committees are asking questions. Media investigations are ongoing. The truth is out there, Malcolm. It can't be buried again. A muffled sound from outside drew their attention. Washington moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Security patrol, she confirmed, relaxing slightly. They're doing perimeter sweeps every 15 minutes. Malcolm studied his attorney, this brilliant, dedicated woman who had committed herself fully to their fight. Thank you, Elaine, for everything. This has gone far beyond legal representation. She smiled, the expression tired but genuine. This case matters, Malcolm. It's the kind that can create real change, not just individual justice, but systemic reform. Those don't come along often in a career. Their conversation was interrupted by the harsh blare of an alarm. The perimeter breach warning. Washington immediately reached for her phone, calling the security team. Location of breach, she demanded. After listening briefly, she turned to Malcolm. Eastern fence line, 2 unidentified individuals. Security is responding. Malcolm was already moving, heading for Olivia's room. He found her awake, putting on shoes. I heard, she said tersely. Breach protocol. Secure room until we know more, he confirmed, leading her to the reinforced basement safe room. Washington had prepared for exactly this scenario. As they descended the stairs, the power cut out, plunging the house into darkness. Emergency lights activated immediately, casting long shadows down the hallway. They're targeting utilities, Washington said grimly, joining them with a satellite phone and handgun. Professional approach. The 3 reached the safe room, a converted wine cellar with reinforced door, independent power, and communication systems. Washington secured the door behind them, immediately activating the backup generator and security monitors that showed camera feeds from around the property. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. Multiple armed individuals in tactical gear moving methodically toward the house. The security team was engaging them, but appeared outnumbered. This isn't a harassment attempt, Washington said, voice tight as she dialed Monroe. This is a hit team. Malcolm watched the monitors, heart pounding as he counted at least 6 attackers, using professional formations to advance despite resistance from the security detail. He pulled Olivia close, positioning himself between her and the door. Monroe's sending tactical response. Washington reported after a brief call. ETA 12 minutes. They'll be inside before then, Olivia observed, watching an attacker place something against a side door. Seconds later, a muffled explosion shook the house. The attackers had breached the main floor. They know the layout, Washington realized. They're coming directly for the safe room. Malcolm made a swift decision. We need to evacuate. Is the tunnel access still secure? Washington checked a separate monitor. Appears clear. But once we leave this room, we're exposed. Malcolm acknowledged. But if they know about the safe room, staying here just makes us trapped targets. Dad's right. Olivia agreed. Better to move than wait to be cornered. Washington nodded reluctantly, retrieving a second handgun from a lockbox and offering it to Malcolm. Ever fired one? Not since law school, he admitted, accepting the weapon with grim determination. But I remember the basics. Washington quickly checked the hidden exit, a narrow tunnel installed during Prohibition that led to a concealed exit 50 yards into the woods. Confirming it was clear, she led them through, sealing the entrance behind them. The tunnel was low and cramped, forcing them to move in a hunched position. Malcolm insisted on taking the rear position, unwilling to have Olivia behind him as they fled. Above them, muffled sounds of gunfire and shouting penetrated the ground. The FBI tactical team had arrived, engaging the attackers in what sounded like a significant firefight. They reached the tunnel's end, a trapdoor leading up to a small shed camouflaged amid dense trees. Washington checked the exterior camera feed on her tablet before carefully pushing it open. Clear, she whispered, but stay low and move quickly. Extraction vehicle should be at the service road, 300 yards northeast. They emerged into the cold night air, crouching among the trees. The main house was visible in the distance, tactical lights cutting through darkness as federal agents secured the property. Gunfire had ceased, suggesting the confrontation had ended, though weather favorably remained unclear. Washington took point, leading them through the woods toward the service road, where an emergency vehicle waited as part of their contingency plan. Malcolm kept Olivia between them, constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a figure stepped from behind a tree 20 yards ahead, weapon raised. Washington froze, her own gun coming up instinctively. "Federal agent," the figure called. "Identify yourselves. Elaine Washington with Judge Pierce and Olivia Pierce." She responded, keeping her weapon steady. "Authentication code Sierra, 9 Delta." The agent lowered his weapon slightly. "Confirmation code, Echo, 5 Tango." Washington replied, using the response that had been established with Monroe's team. The agent nodded, holstering his weapon. "Areas being secured. Multiple hostiles in custody, 2 down. We need to move you to the secondary location immediately." As he spoke, 2 more agents emerged from the trees, moving to flank their small group. Something about their positioning triggered Malcolm's instincts. They were cutting off retreat paths rather than providing protection. "Washington," he said quietly, "when did we establish confirmation codes?" Her body tensed almost imperceptibly. "We didn't." The realization hit simultaneously. These weren't federal agents. The lead man's expression shifted from professional to predatory, as he realized his deception had failed. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. Washington shoved Olivia behind a large tree trunk, shouting, "Run," as she brought her weapon up. The false agent fired first, the sound deafening in the quiet forest. Washington staggered but returned fire, dropping the man with a shot to the chest. Malcolm pushed Olivia toward the dense underbrush, positioning himself between her and the remaining attackers. He raised his own weapon as the second man came into view, aiming with hands that somehow remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He fired twice, the recoil jolting through his arms. The first shot went wide, but the second caught the attacker in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. "Dad!" Olivia's scream cut through the chaos. Malcolm turned to see the third attacker emerging behind them, weapon trained on Olivia. Time seemed to slow as Malcolm lunged, putting his body between his daughter and the gunman. The shot came, a sound more felt than heard. Malcolm expected pain, braced for it, but instead witnessed the attacker crumple, a precise bullet hole in his forehead. Beyond the fallen man stood Detective Monroe, weapon still raised, expression grim. "Judge," he acknowledged, quickly moving to check Washington, who was pressing a hand to her bleeding arm. "We need to move. Now. The property's secure, but there may be more hostiles in the area." "How did you find us?" Malcolm asked as they hurried through the woods, supporting Washington between them. "Tracked your emergency beacon," Monroe replied. "Activated when you left the safe room. Good thing you did. Strike team hit the room with explosive charges 3 minutes after you evacuated." They reached the actual extraction vehicle, an unmarked SUV with bullet-resistant glass. Monroe helped Washington into the back, where a medic immediately began treating her wound. Flesh wound. Washington confirmed through gritted teeth. "I'll live." As they pulled away, speeding down rural roads toward a secure federal facility, Malcolm held Olivia close, his heart still racing. They had survived, barely, but the message was clear. Their opponents were willing to commit multiple murders, engage in direct firefights with federal agents, and risk everything to silence them. "It's over," Monroe said, meeting Malcolm's eyes in the rearview mirror. "We've got them all. Sullivan, Reeves, Hayes, the Castillo leadership, and now these contractors. Martinez's testimony plus the evidence from tonight gives us everything we need." Malcolm wasn't so certain. "Who sent them? Who has resources to hire a professional hit team?" "We'll find out," Monroe promised. "One of them survived. With the charges he's facing, he'll talk." Dawn was breaking as they reached the federal safe house, a nondescript building in a suburban area outside Albany, secured by FBI agents. As they were escorted inside, Malcolm caught glimpses of the morning news on a monitor in the security office. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen: "Federal agents foil assassination attempt on Judge Pierce and daughter in police corruption case." The public battle had reached its climax. A direct, violent attempt to silence them had failed spectacularly, transforming a serious but localized corruption case into a national scandal. The coverage showed federal agents leading handcuffed suspects into vehicles, crime scene tape surrounding Washington's property, and file footage of Sullivan, Hayes, and Reeves. Malcolm felt a strange combination of exhaustion and clarity. The night's violence had been terrifying but clarifying. The depths of corruption they'd uncovered were even greater than they'd imagined. The stakes higher, the system more broken. But they had survived. The truth was emerging. Justice, so often denied in similar cases, seemed within reach. 6 months later, Malcolm stood at the podium in the Justice Department's main conference room, addressing assembled media, advocates, and officials. Behind him sat a panel including the Attorney General, the FBI Director, and key legislators who had championed the police reform bill that had emerged from the investigation. 6 months ago, Malcolm began, his voice steady and measured. What began as a simple traffic stop escalated into one of the most significant police corruption investigations in recent history. What we uncovered wasn't just about individual officers acting outside the law. It was about systems designed to protect those officers, to bury complaints, to intimidate victims, and to maintain power structures that enable abuse. The room was silent, cameras flashing as he continued. The indictments announced today, 37 in total, across multiple agencies and private entities, represent a significant step toward accountability. But true justice requires more than prosecuting those directly involved. It requires systemic change to prevent similar abuses in the future. Malcolm gestured to the legislators behind him. The Pierce Act, which passed the Senate yesterday and awaits the President's signature, creates new oversight mechanisms, enhances accountability measures, and provides resources for community-based alternatives to traditional policing. It represents a bipartisan recognition that public safety and civil rights are not opposing interests. They are mutually dependent values that must coexist in a just society. As he concluded his remarks and opened the floor for questions, Malcolm reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Sullivan and Hayes had both pleaded guilty to multiple charges, facing substantial prison time. Reeves was awaiting trial on racketeering, conspiracy, and corruption charges, along with several Castillo organization leaders and city officials implicated in the gentrification scheme. The hit team that attacked the safe house had been linked to a private security contractor with ties to both the Castillo organization and certain elements within the police union. 3 men were dead, 4 more facing attempted murder and conspiracy charges. The price had been high. Washington still attended physical therapy for her arm injury. Malcolm and Olivia had lived under federal protection for months. Johnson's murder remained a stark reminder of the human cost of challenging corrupt systems. But change was happening. The NYPD had implemented sweeping reforms under federal oversight. Similar investigations had launched in other cities as victims found courage in Malcolm's example to come forward with their own experiences. The national conversation around policing, race, and accountability had shifted significantly. After the press conference, Malcolm met briefly with Eleanor and Olivia in a private room. His return to the bench was scheduled for the following month, his leave of absence ending with his reputation not just intact, but enhanced by his stance against corruption. "You've actually done it," Eleanor said, embracing him warmly. "Changed the system from within, not alone," Malcolm corrected, looking to Olivia with pride. "And not completely. The work continues." Olivia smiled, the experience having strengthened rather than diminished her commitment to justice. She had become a prominent voice in the reform movement, her experiences informing her advocacy in powerful ways. "It continues," she agreed, "but today we celebrate what's been accomplished. The Pierce Act isn't perfect, but it's a foundation we can build on." As they prepared to leave, Detective Monroe, now Captain Monroe, promoted for his role in the investigation, appeared at the door. "Judge Pierce," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations. What you've achieved here will save lives and change policing for the better." Malcolm shook his hand firmly. "What we've achieved, Captain. None of this happens without allies willing to stand up within the system." Monroe nodded, acknowledging the point. "Reform is always a team effort. The corrupt rely on code of silence and intimidation. Breaking those patterns requires voices from every corner speaking truth together. Later that evening, as Malcolm stood at the window of his hotel room overlooking Washington, D.C., he reflected on Monroe's words. His own journey had begun with a single incident of brutality, one of countless similar incidents that occurred daily across America. The difference wasn't in the nature of the incident, but in his response to it. His refusal to be silenced, his use of resources and position to demand accountability, and his commitment to pushing beyond individual justice to systemic change. His phone buzzed with a news alert, another city announcing oversight reforms based on the Pierce Act framework. Small steps, accumulating slowly toward meaningful change. Not a revolution, but evolution, steady pressure forcing systems to adapt or collapse. Malcolm had learned through painful experience that justice rarely comes swiftly or completely. The system resists change, protects its own, and fights accountability at every turn. But he'd also learned that persistence matters, that strategic pressure works, and that even the most entrenched corruption can be exposed when enough voices join together in demanding truth. He thought of Sullivan's face that rainy night, the casual cruelty in his eyes as he struck a man he viewed as beneath him. How many others had suffered similar or worse fates, without cameras recording, without resources to fight back, without platforms to demand justice? The work would continue, had to continue, until such abuses became rare exceptions rather than routine expectations, until the system consistently protected victims rather than perpetrators, until justice was truly blind to color rather than systematically biased against it. For now, Malcolm took satisfaction in the changes already manifest, the legislation bearing his name, the officers facing consequences, the victims finding courage to speak. A single traffic stop had cascaded into national reform because he had refused to be another silent victim of a broken system. As night fell over the Capitol, Malcolm turned away from the window and returned to reviewing the speech he would deliver at tomorrow's bill signing ceremony. The final words resonated with his deepest convictions. Justice is never given freely by systems of power. It must be demanded, pursued, and secured through persistent courage and collective action. Today marks not an ending but a beginning, a commitment to building institutions worthy of the trust all communities place in them. The work continues, but today we take a significant step forward together. The work would indeed continue. But tonight, in this moment, Malcolm Pierce allowed himself to feel something that had eluded him since that fateful traffic stop. The quiet satisfaction of justice served, not just for himself, but for all those who would come after. The system hadn't won this time, and that made all the difference.